Hello everyone, this is SC Slarage. If you feel like Year 2 of Destiny hasn't stood up to Year 1, this video is for you. I personally think Bungie has made some design errors in Year 2, some of which are being improved in the April 12th update, and many that are not. I'd like to talk about what I think should be reevaluated between now and the next expansion, so I'll just get into the biggest, most unresolved issue. The advent of Year 2 brought a plethora of top-tier weaponry that is acquired through fixed quest lines, missions, or vendors. Weapons that fall into this category include Sleeper Simulant, Raise Lighter, Boltcaster, Dark Drinker, the Vertigo, Black Spindle, 1000-Yard Stare from both Quest and Vendor, Steel Piercer, Conspiracy Theory D, Burden of Proof 11, Down and Doubt, The First Curse, Ace of Spades, The Vanity, Hung Jury, and Slalok. Also known as just about every weapon you use for anything in the game. I'm sure that sounds great on paper, but it's really inappropriate for a loot-based game. Let's think about how that compares to Year 1. Through all of Vanilla, Crota's End, and House of Wolves, achieving all of the best gear at the max level took a lot of weekly repetition. The probability of getting top-tier gear was low enough that it was an expectation it would take months to collect all of it. For any Year 1 player that still plays enough Destiny to complain about it, those months were a gamble that was obviously enjoyable enough to keep them playing. Considering raids required a competent 6-man team, a noteworthy side effect of this loot system was that it helped to forge social relationships. Once a week, groups would want to get together for a tough activity that encouraged them to communicate with each other, to play together more often, and in the process, they would share in each other's successes and failures. Each group would have that guy that got the Mythic class before it was nerfed, and that guy who hadn't gotten Black Hammer after killing Crota 12 dozen times. Getting our best loot from random drops was a unique experience in Destiny, and sharing it with each other was awesome. A big problem in Year 2 is that all those guns that I just mentioned before, about 2 of them actually require you to touch 6-man content. There's not really anywhere near the same level of incentive from Year 1 to actually play with your friends. But going back to Year 2 now, the most obvious implication of getting the best loot through those quests and vendors is that nobody can be lucky, ever. There's no Icebreaker or Galahorn or Fatebringer or Black Hammer, and there's no Vision of Confluence or Corrective Measure or Solar Jewel of Osiris. For Year 1 players, after the first few weeks of the Taken King, there's just no drop so lucky that it actually makes a difference worth talking about in our PvE game. From a loot perspective, there's just nothing to hope for, and that's a big issue for a game that is so fundamentally motivated by loot. The worst part of it all, again, is that most of the guaranteed guns don't even require you to play with people. You can do almost all of them through matchmaking activities. If you don't have the best items in Year 1, there's still something to hope for playing every week, but if you don't have the best items in Year 2 of Destiny, it's within reach at any moment, and you can grab it whenever you feel like. That's just not exciting. Most of the best gear should come from the relevant raid or rare random weapons and matchmaking activities, in my opinion. I don't think there's really a downside to practically requiring cooperative play for the maxed characters of a cooperative game. One would assume that's a given. To put it as clearly as possible, giving the best rewards for expected activity completions like quests and purchasing through vendors is a huge mismatch of effort to reward. Let's talk about why King's Fall as a raid fell short. I'm sure there's at least a few people thinking, but the raid gear is great, Slayer, and I'm going to stop to explain why you're wrong and why King's Fall, despite being the most mechanically challenging and satisfying raid to complete so far, and I do mean that, it is a fantastic raid. It just doesn't really feel worth it anymore, and frankly, I don't think 335 drops are going to change that, nor will increased reload speed on the weapons. I'll get back to that in a moment, but I'd like to talk about the raid perk, Cocoon, and how I think it's really poorly implemented, or at least especially so before. To those who are unaware, Cocoon reloads your gun for you if you have it holstered for about 4 seconds. Why is that poorly implemented? Nobody really wants a perk that literally requires them to not use the gun that has the perk on it. It's just silly that it takes up a perk node instead of being an extra perk like Oracle Disruptor in the Vaults of Glass days, and the King's Fall weapons have terrible base reload speed right now to, counter the Cocoon perk? Cocoon is a perk basically aimed at reducing weapon downtime, which is great for a gun that reloads slowly like a machine gun, but Bungie apparently thought that killing the reload on every one of the King's Fall weapons would somehow make Cocoon more interesting by practically demanding it, which it doesn't, since the non-King's Fall weapons have plenty of reload speed. The effect is that Cocoon makes the weapons a bit more versatile in one way, while making them clearly inferior in another way. When using a primary with bad reload speed and Cocoon, I don't want to holster my primary and switch to a shotgun if enemies are at optimal primary range. All it would have taken for Cocoon to be useful and interesting would be for the King's Fall weapons to also have great base reload speed, but that isn't how they are right now, so basically they're automatically committed to having one bad perk, effectively giving them 2 random perks, compared with other guns' 3 perks. Admittedly, this will be fixed to some extent in the April update. I'm glad that Bungie recognized the error there, but the fact that it was ever designed that way to begin with boggles my mind. But at any rate, beyond that, I have no idea why they thought it would be okay to put hipfire as a possibility on a raid hand cannon, or Eye of the Storm on a machine gun, or even creating the low impact archetype for the hand cannon and giving the giving the scout rifle no chance at Firefly. It just doesn't make any sense. They've got all these raid weapons that could potentially be relatively strong, and instead they've got perk possibilities that make them bad, on top of the fact that their stats aren't even that good to begin with. Creating potential bad possibilities for random perks is bad enough on its own, but throwing them on the raid weapons is just ridiculous. With their bad stats and stifled perk possibilities, raid weapons just aren't worth using for anything. It would make much more sense to just use a gun that has good base reload speed, not to mention other better stats and clearly better perks. Bungie really needs to go ahead and admit that adding extra perks to weapons is a cool way to make them better, because with whatever logic they've got going on, or at least whatever they had going on, somehow taking away perks made weapons stronger, apparently. I am literally led to the conclusion that Bungie deliberately made the raid weapons worse than other legendaries, which is really weird because that's an obvious mismatch of effort to value, and as any game designer, I think it's pretty obvious that you want your players to be rewarded for more effort being put in. Anyway, once again, to focus on the good of this, thankfully the April update will be buffing the reload speed on the raid weapons, as well as giving Defiance of Yasmin archetype snipers the ability to res snipe in PvP, which will definitely make them a lot more valuable. Will it make it good for PvE? I'm not really sure, but it will sure as heck make them much better. I'm at a loss to why it wasn't like that from the beginning, but at least it's being fixed. The moral of the story here is that I strongly believe in the Vault of Glass loot system. Clearly the design leads aren't making the weapons as strong as Vault of Glass weapons, because those weapons were by and far dominant for almost all activities, but that's exactly what in-game level gear should strive to be. What's the point of getting the raid machine gun if it just reasonably competes with Ruin Wake? And Ruin Wake has a chance of getting better perk rolls too. Raid weapons should be the best, because they are the hardest to get, and it's just pathetic that they clearly fall short of vendor weapons in many cases, and quest weapons in many cases, let alone random lucky drops from engrams or whatever else. Trying to make the raid weapons balanced is a really sweet way to say that they'll be average. Rare, difficult to acquire guns should stand out. There isn't a problem with that. They should be able to outmatch a lot of their competitors. Like if you get a god roll machine gun, maybe it should be Quellum's Terminus. But Quellum's Terminus should be every other machine gun most of the time. And maybe that's a bad example because Quellum's Terminus is pretty good and it still will be good even after it's been nerfed in the April update to some extent. But things like Elulim's Frenzy, it's just not worth using ever. That's a problem. On that note, actually, the raid's sword, Oryx's Demise, is probably the most interestingly balanced weapon from the raid because what the raid sword lacks in existence, it makes up for in disappointment. Most of the King's Fall weapons were just normal disappointing, but the raid sword really wins the prize on that one. Seriously, how do you miss that? Anyway, as it stands, the luckiest you can possibly get in King's Fall is to bring a piece of gear you already have up values in attack or defense, also known as basically no change at all. King's Fall unequivocally fails in its role of providing worthwhile loot, because the hardest activity that requires lucky drops and is only available once per week can only provide wimpy loot, while the quest lines and missions that are available all the time provide strong loot. Again, it's a huge mismatch of effort to reward, and it's no surprise that it has left some players unhappy with the current state of affairs. I believe that raid weapons need to have high impact, ammo reserves, or an excellent roll of perks in order to be considered valuable. The unyielding system of archetypes, rate of fire correlating perfectly with impact, and magazine size matching closely behind, that should be more malleable. Just to give a simple example, if you buffed the raid hand cannon's magazine and reserve ammo twofold, it could make more sense for Cocoon to be useful, and it certainly would not unbalance PvP. There's no way that having a 20 magazine gun is really going to destroy PvP. And alternatively, what about a low rate of fire hand cannon with a gigantic magazine? Is that really going to break the Crucible? You can't even fire bullets fast enough for it to take advantage of that benefit. What about like a high rate of fire, high impact sniper that chopped your agility down by 10 and had virtually no stability? I mean, magazine size is almost irrelevant in the Crucible balance. The archetypes could stand to have more wiggle room, and it would not break the game if you experimented with it and found ways of balancing the different advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, we know that because of MIDA, it is possible for guns to have perks that increase our agility. There's no reason we couldn't have perks that decrease our agility, or our armor, or our recovery, or other abilities. You could have a weapon that just makes your grenade cooldown non-existent. I mean, there are ways to make the guns have trade-offs to correspond with their benefits. But at any rate, another solution that really ought to be tied in with individualized archetypes, in my opinion, would be to give raid weapons just flat out more perks than non-raid weapons. Balancing this with PvP wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world, but things like Will of Light and Cocoon go to show that it is possible. Obviously, that doesn't need to apply exclusively to raid weapons, but I'm assuming at this point it's clear that I think weapons that are strong should come from hard activities, or a huge amount of luck. Decent weapons should come from everyday activities and, average amount of luck. I would also say it's absolutely to Bungie's credit that certain weapon foundries offer different perk choice nodes. Amalam weapon setup of 2 different options for where you can change your perks is good. That's a step forward. I would say that Hake's moving the choice node from the 2nd to the 3rd place, that's kind of superficial and silly, but the idea is there. If they run with it, it'll be good. So, moving on. King's Fall Challenge mode pretty much sucks from a loot standpoint. If you get guaranteed 320 loot from the War Priest every 3 weeks, 3 times a week if you have 3 characters, why would you bother with the less than 9% chance at a 320 drop from him any other week? Challenge mode loot should have randomly dropped in heroic mode, and the chance it drops anything short of 320 was just something that should have never happened. Challenge mode itself should have been more challenging, with only cosmetic rewards instead of being an incentive to do the fights normally. I'm not doing this topic complete justice, but the design of King's Fall is something that I talk about often on my Twitch streams, and I don't really have enough commentary for a full video. Basically, my point is that the raid is a fantastic step forward from a gameplay perspective, but the loot is done really badly. I don't think anyone would have been happy with the challenge modes at all if they didn't give us loot. Challenge mode's release made me feel like a little kid whose parents said they were taking me to Disneyland, and then when the day finally arrives, they're like, hey, let's just go see a Disney movie and we'll buy you some Mickey Mouse ears. Not really what I was hoping for. I'm sure I'll get some backlash for that string of comments, but I'd stand by it. Challenge mode was terrible, and nobody would like it at all if it didn't drop 320 gear. For any team good enough to do the raid, forcing us to do the fights normally for better loot just comes across as a superficial time game more than anything. That's all I have to say about the raid. This time around it just feels like wasted effort out of the first completion, and that just sucks. And I'm not just complaining here, by the way. What I'm trying to do is broadcast my opinion that that should not happen again. We should never have a raid again where it doesn't feel like it's worth doing for the loot. We should have things like Vault of Glass, where every week we're hoping to get one of the weapons that we don't have, so we can get the full set of really strong weapons that are useful for months. And they don't have to be useful beyond that. It's just... in-level loot should be good. That's all I'm saying. Let's move on to our last guaranteed loot issue. Fixed loot exotics beat the random ones in most ways, which makes Xur pretty unexciting, and I've heard him admit to being a trash collector a few times, but I still hate to see him selling garbage every week. When he sells Hereafter, all I see is discount Black Spindle. When he sells Telesto, all I see is discount Sleeper Simulant. Does anyone even buy anything other than 3 of coins from him anymore? I mean, if you go out of your way to get Hung Jury, the Vendor 1000-Yard Stare, and Raise Lighter, your loadout is darn near perfect already. What could Xur possibly bring that's a game changer? This is just another example of guaranteed rewards making rare stuff from weekly resets obsolete. Xur should be pretty exciting, but at the moment he's pointless because of guaranteed rewards, and more importantly 3 of coins, to be honest. But the fact that guaranteed rewards are the strong ones is kind of lame in some cases. Some cases. I'm not saying that it's wrong to be able to get them sometimes. Black Spindle is not easy to get, Sleeper Simulant requires a lot of effort. They should be strong weapons, I just don't think they should necessarily be beating out the competition of other exotics. Anyway, random drops also just so happen to pretty much stink these days. There are too many terrible perks, like Underdog, Eye of the Storm, Persistence, Surrounded, Grave Robber, Last Resort, Life Leech. I could probably go on, but the point is, those kinds of things are clogging up the pipeline for possibilities of rolls that are worth using. If those perks were thrown into the pool to make it all the sweeter when we get a perfect roll, that would be fine and all, but we already have a perfect Hung Jury. We already have a good 1000-Yard Stare. We can get a well-rolled rocket launcher from the gunsmith. Why give us a perfect weapon and then tease us with bad random drops? Like, if we get a perfect IS Lina roll, cool, now we have a second option. But if we get a bad one, it's not like we're heartbroken. Again, to give a terrible analogy, it's like giving a dog a $40 steak and then holding dog treats just out of its reach. He's already eating a steak. He's not going to play your games for a shriveled pig ear. Why put huge walls in the way of pursuing a second gun so we can enjoy playstyle variety? If that's such an important design goal, we don't need it for power, we just want it to be a bit more unique. It's not worth grinding Crucible for an IS Luna, then in all likelihood we'll just have Army of One, Surrounded, and Feathermag. Again, it's loot used poorly as a motivator. This is a mismatch of effort to reward. Some perks that are bad, that makes sense. But at this point, they dramatically outnumber the good perks, and that's a problem. The moral of the story here is that the Taken King's various guaranteed loot exhausts a huge incentive for playing the game, which is getting better guns, much more quickly. Lost motivation to do the raids, Nightfalls, and some other activities, quote-unquote no content, which is an issue we've always had, that's just collateral damage. The various guaranteed rewards in the game, those need to be reeled into a level where they're good, but not the best. And I'm totally fine with quest lines for exotics, and I actually think that the build up to acquiring things like the First Curse, Sleeper Simulant, No Time to Explain, and Black Spindle is some of the coolest stuff Destiny has done so far, and I am not complaining about that. The only issue with those things is that they don't have much replayability, which is obviously unavoidable in guaranteed rewards. I also believe that guns that are available through the raid or Nightfall should be able to outshine them in some cases. For instance, Black Spindle is an absolute boss killer in the raid. Why does the raid sniper not have higher impact so it can at least compete, and maybe a larger magazine size so that it actually takes advantage of Cocoon? Black Spindle would still win in a DPS comparison, but at least the raid sniper would be able to compete a little bit by not taking up the exotic slot and by providing the, free reload. I could create dozens of examples of guns from the raid or not. They could put the fixed rewards in a better place, but the driving point behind all of this is that rare rewards, especially from tough activities, should be worth the effort. They should be able to outshine things that are easier to get. Let's move on to the next really big, albeit much shorter topic, which is the gunsmith. The gunsmith and his test weapons and questlines are new to Year 2 of Destiny, and I'll admit, in some ways, I really like that system. I think we should be able to do test weapons for hours if it suits our fancy, instead of 5 max per week, but that's not my main point with this guy. I think it's seriously bad that the gunsmith weapons can be among the most powerful weapons in the game for the absolute least minimum effort you can imagine. 2,500 glimmer. I bought a Suros JLB-47 with an Irene RR4 together. I bought a Suros JLB-47 and an Irene RR4 forever ago, and now I have a rocket launcher with heavy payload, javelin, and surplus, as well as a different one that has heavy payload, javelin, and proximity, and then I have a sniper with triple tap, unflinching, and casket mag, and I could have had one with luck in the chamber if I'd cared to do that too, when it was powerful. Those are literally 95% of the way to being perfect PvE and PvP weapons in their prime, and the only effort it took to acquire them was to check once a week what he's offering on his rolls. About 5 minutes of effort a week for perfect weapons. I can check a Reddit thread every week and see what roll he's selling, so in some sense, because the roll changes every week and I shouldn't buy it on a week when it's a bad roll, I'm literally being rewarded for not playing Destiny. I mean, think about this. We have to re-roll before with a Mode of Light, 5 weapon parts, and 250 glimmer. Now it costs 2,500 glimmer, and that's, 10 times as much as one re-roll if you take out the 10 modes of light and the 50 weapon parts, which, 50 weapon parts isn't nothing in and of itself, but we get infinite rerolls from that. Reforging is actually less expensive than before. That's silly. As much as I love the gunsmith, he just does not have anywhere near enough investment in order to succeed, and I don't know why he's acting more like a merchant than a gunsmith. Speaking of which, I think that Bungie was trying to make him less overpowered by removing reforging, which in itself wasn't the worst idea, in my opinion. Reforging, that is. Reforging allowed weapons to be turned into the gunsmith with a Mode of Light and weapon parts, and voila, you got an entirely new set of perks on the weapon. Naturally, that led to everybody and their mother having a perfectly rolled high-impact shotgun and any other weapon of any type that you could imagine. That was a pretty bad thing overall because it reduced the weapon variety to a very shallow pool of choices that were the best you could have, since it would, force the rolls to make it so. And it caused the PvP and PvE metagame to stagnate pretty quickly. But I don't think that reforging was the issue. I think it was the ability to reforge at a low cost with very dominant archetypes of weapons. If you could roll a weapon hundreds of times back to back, eventually you're going to get the perfect roll. At any rate, it seems obviously backwards for the gunsmith to sell packages, which offer 3 random rolls a week, and you can carry a package for weeks and weeks and weeks until you see the roll you like, when reforging was removed. Basically, the gunsmith packages are time-gated reforging for any weapon in the gunsmith's inventory, and it's no surprise that many of them are the strongest weapons in the game because of that. Why is he acting like a merchant? He should just have some sort of, gunsmithing ability, maybe, with our existing weapons? Or, if we placed orders with him for him to make us a weapon? I don't know. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Again, the problem with reforging before was that shotguns, they were dominant. That's all there was to it. They were much stronger than snipers because you could be extremely mobile with them and they had a really far kill range. If you had reforging right now, it would not be anywhere near the same level of issue. The same level of issue is kind of present with 1,000-Yard Stare. It is the most dominant gun in the Crucible right now, but that's because it's the only relatively high-impact sniper that doesn't take up an exotic slot and has decent aim assist, and it's readily available. Like, if you have those guns being readily available when they obviously have strong traits that outplay all the other guns, of course it's going to be the most commonly used weapon. It's not because reforging was bad, and it's not because the 1,000-Yard Stare is just the most OP gun in the world. It's because there's no competition for them when they have the traits that they do and no other guns do. What I really think ought to have happened with reforging would be that if you got 2 Imago loops, for instance, you could take them to the gunsmith and reforge one into the other, keeping the best perks from both. After getting 4 or 5 separate drops, you'd be able to get a really darn good roll on any gun. That would make the RNG of getting a good perk satisfying to get, like if you found Outlaw and a hand cannon, that would be awesome, while also making reforging costly enough to not just be handouts. You'd really need to farm out whatever weapon you wanted if you were trying to get a perfect roll. Bonus points for the fact that the guns would be individualized to your liking. They would feel very unique because you would be the one choosing your perk roll on your chosen weapon, and you could still get lucky and just get a god roll by a random drop. It wouldn't take away that benefit, but it would add to the benefit of actually putting some effort in, and also give us a tiny bit of customization that would lead us to actually wanting to put the effort into getting guns like Ice Luna. I mean, yes, that would result in players having some really strong weapons, but as discussed in that list of guaranteed guns, it's not like we're really avoiding that issue to begin with, and much more importantly, nobody wants a system where people can't get the best guns no matter how hard they try. How much would that suck? I think that reforging belongs in the game with so many perks and so many guns, especially with so many of the perks being bad. It was just, the good idea was implemented at a bad time, considering that shotguns just ran the Crucible when reforging was brought around. To sum this all up, the gunsmith basically encourages us to not play the game instead of encouraging us to try for great drops, just like Challenge Mode Raid and Nightfalls if you want strike-specific loot or 320 drops. It makes no sense to grind your heart out for a perfect Elohim's Frenzy when a Suros JLB is better in a dozen different ways and requires much less effort to get. So let's get back to Xur for a moment. 3 of coins are a terrible, terrible idea. I am not 100% sure if engrams are even a good idea, but getting an exotic engram is just not as exciting as getting a specific exotic. When you get an exotic chest engram, for instance, it's exciting because of the possibility that you might get that Tarantella you've been after, but you know deep down it's probably just going to be another Crest of Alpha Lupi. And because of that, getting the engram itself does not inspire happiness or excitement so much as it inspires just a really mixed, ambivalent feeling. That's not really great when you're talking about the rarest quality of item in the game. Back when exotics dropped from Strikes and Crucible, it was pretty exciting to see a universal remote drop after a game. It's much less generic, for instance, than seeing YOLO Swagmaster found an exotic engram. But if you see, YOLO Swagmaster found universal remote or Icebreaker or Galahorn, suddenly a lot of variety is introduced into what you might see other players getting, and that makes the weapons feel unique. That's good to see. I mean, maybe the exotic engram he got would have turned into Icebreaker or Galahorn or Universal Remote, but that's just not as exciting because you don't even really see that until you're at the tower, and that's just not the place you want to see it because that's not encouraging you to play any specific activity. That's not like, oh man, that guy got Galahorn in the Crucible, I should play Crucible. It's just like, oh, that guy had an exotic engram. And you can't even get an Icebreaker or Galahorn because those don't exist anymore, friendly reminder. I mean, again, the fact that there aren't really powerful weapons, kind of lame. Are exotic engrams something that should be completely removed? Probably not. I mean, the amount of engrams that have started dropping from majors and ultras and strike bosses and raid bosses and so forth is really cool in the Taken King. That is a super cool change. I just don't think they should come from the Crucible or strike completions in the form of engrams. They should drop like greens or blues would, just with less frequency, and random exotic weapons and armor from activity completion should not come in the form of engrams. But that's just my 2 cents on the aesthetics of acquiring exotics. However, what I do see as an unambiguous issue is that 3 of coins makes Xur useless. Oh, Xur isn't selling the item or engram that I wanted this week? Time to load up on 3 of coins and wait until next week. 3 of coins is basically mini Xur, and that makes him totally irrelevant and unexciting because now we actually have a specific means towards getting the supposedly very rare stuff he sells. For instance, he has not sold Twilight Garrison, even though it has been in the game for months now. Pretty much anybody that actually wants Twilight Garrison has probably gotten it by just using 3 of coins. That is silly. That makes Twilight Garrison less exciting. That makes Xur less exciting. I mean, more importantly, these 3 of coins are really just devaluing exotics in other ways too. Like when you get 7 or 8 Gauntlet engrams before getting what you want from them, you're probably going to wind up dismantling young Ahamkara's spine 2 or 3 times on the journey to getting the sealed Ahamkara grasps. That teaches us that exotics aren't rare or valuable, and it's totally cool to just throw them away, an item of the rarest class possible, in the trash can. That is a huge issue of poorly allocating value yet again. The armory kinda creates the same issue by allowing us to get copies of exotic weapons, but because it's such an inconvenience, I have a hard time suggesting that should be changed in any way. I mean, the armory is actually really nice. At any rate, 3 of coins need to go. They're a bad idea, and they should never have been in the game in the first place. Adding ease of access to the rarest and most valuable loot just lowers the highest possible value for loot in the game, reducing overall motivations for playing long term. You should not put an easy button next to rare items, because then there's no such thing as rare items. It's devaluing our exotics, and it's making Xur unimportant, which is something that's actually, interesting for logging in every week, and it is making no exotic actually rare to begin with, which all 3 of those things are problems that I don't think they should have ever been introduced to the game. I do not think that we should have an easy road to getting exotics. I think that if Xur sold Galahorn in year 2, nobody really would be excited. Like, the amount of buzz over Galahorn in year 1, all the people that couldn't get it all year, that brought all kinds of attention to the Galahorn tag on Twitter. That would never happen in year 2 because we can already get it with 3 of coins. And finally, because I know everyone has been waiting the entire video for this, what in the world is with the ghost shells from the Nightfall? Honestly, do I really need 45,000 Vanguard shells? What am I supposed to do with all that crap? Nightfall rewards are so lackluster. Another thing that I'm surprised has not been brought into the game is unique armor and weapons for the Nightfall. Nightfall shouldn't be the equivalent of a scratch-off lottery ticket, like once a week you get a slightly better chance at getting what you could be getting somewhere else with a tiny bit more luck. That's lame. To reiterate a final point for Nightfalls, they also demonstrate the same problem that Challenge Mode does, which is that if a player wants a Flayer Cloak, or Taniks Cloak, or the Devouring Maw, or any other strike-specific drop, it just makes no sense to play the game until the Nightfall has the chance of dropping that strike-specific reward, since the drop rates are so much better in Nightfalls. You may as well wait until you have a better chance, thereby, again, encouraging us not to play certain weeks. Like, if you need a 320 helmet and the Flayer Cloak, and you're waiting for your Suros JLB rocket launcher, and you go online and see what the gunsmith's selling, and it's a bad Suros JLB rocket launcher, there's no surplus, and it's War Priest Challenge Week, so no 320 helmet, and it's the Tanic Strike, so there's no chance of a Flayer Cloak, it's like, well, guess I'm not playing this week. That's just lame. All 3 of those things are lame. That should never happen. Just to quickly talk about the new Infusion system, Infusion was a cute idea, and the gradual build to 300 Light and beyond was awesome. I thought that was a lot of fun. But it's pretty silly that raid gear is infusion fuel for your questline weapons. It really should be the other way around. The raid should drop powerful weapons that require infusion from other items you acquire through strikes, or better yet, a horde mode minigame. Some sort of activity that you can put on high difficulty to give high-grade infusion fuel. The good weapons and infusion fuel are separate currently, but their method of acquisition hurts the motivations for both. Infusion in itself might not be a bad system, but it definitely needs fine-tuning. Infusion fuel needs to be acquired how you would expect to acquire an item that you plan to get rid of. And good weapons need to be acquired through a meaningful effort. With the April 12th fix of giving full value increase through infusion, things will be somewhat better, I'm sure, but the issue will still exist that we are encouraged to give up the hard-to-acquire items in favor of less hard-to-acquire items. This would feel a lot less like an issue if the hardest weapons were worth keeping for other reasons. So if you got Zoali's Bane, for instance, and it was actually good, you would want to keep your first one, but then maybe your second one was okay to use as infusion fuel. But really, ideally, I think what would go on is you would have something like a horde mode where there is a level 40 version, level 42 version, level 43 version, 44 and 45. And if you did the level 45 version, that would jump your gear to the max level possible in that expansion. The 44 version would put you a little bit of light below that, the 43 version would put a little bit light below that, and so forth. So that if you wanted to do the hardest activity in the game, like the highest level raid possible, you would really want to grind that horde mode for a little while, and then if you did the raid, you would need then get guns that made you more powerful, and you would need to do more of the horde mode to get them up to full level. And yes, I think that would be a lot more desirable than going into the raid, getting the best weapons in the game, quote unquote, the hardest weapons to get, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll give this up for the vendor, not like the others that I bought because it's got explosive rounds. I don't know. I think that's a pretty backward system. I definitely think that infusion fuel should be acquired through something that you can do enough times that it's okay to get rid of it, not really a big deal. Again, you should not be devaluing the hardest weapons to get in the game. Just like 3 of coins makes exotics worthless, infusion makes the raid weapons worthless. Because they're the only weapons currently that drop at 320, therefore they're the only weapons that you can use as infusion fuel. The raid should never have been infusion fuel. Anyway, I think I've pretty much talked that over. So on a related note, a lot of people have had said something to the effect of Bungie needs to not be scared to include Galahorn or Black Hammer. Super powerful loot, makes us feel strong and it's cool. I want to specifically address how much I don't agree with that complaint, because it has been wonderfully addressed. All 3 exotic swords, Sleeper Simulant, Black Spindle, Dragon's Breath, all of those weapons are super cool and very powerful, and they definitely have their position where you want to use them. Dragon's Breath with Surplus is really good, Sleeper Simulant is amazing for staggering Oryx, Black Spindle is really good for DPSing Golgoroth, and the War Priest, and a variety of other bosses. All 3 of the exotic swords are great for mages, and Boltcaster is really good for certain ad control, not to mention the fact that they're sweet. I mean, we have some really amazing feeling exotics, and they're actually relatively balanced for once, and I don't like how we get all of those weapons necessarily, but as far as having really strong exotics, they've done an awesome job of giving us at least that. I just think that legendaries need to be more in line with exotics, because right now, legendaries just don't stand out at all. And I do think there are also some exotics like Telesto and Hereafter that just don't stand out enough. But at any rate, I do think there should probably be some uber rare items to pine for, but we'll worry about that at some other point. I do think that they've done a pretty good job giving us really strong weapons. I just don't think they should be guaranteed. Let's move on to the topic I mentioned in passing a bit earlier. Armor is probably one of the most neglected things in Destiny. First of all, I think that our ghosts, class items, and artifacts are not being handled appropriately. Ghosts should be purely cosmetic in my opinion. Ghost shells are, for the most part, shaders for your ghost. If our shaders don't have light levels, why do our ghost shells have light levels? I think shells for our ghosts should basically mark game completion. As we acquire new ghost shells, the ghost becomes more powerful and unlocks new abilities that we already have in the game, like finding Glimmer from Hunters in the Crucible, engrams on the Dreadnought, locating certain Spirit Bloom locations, etc. Those abilities are just too passive to have the gear swap feel meaningful, so it's an inconvenience more than anything if you need a different ghost shell, and I think it makes more sense to make it aggregate into your ghost's database, if you will. For instance, if you go into the Crucible and see that the other team is predominantly Hunters, you're not going to switch off your Titan Bounty Ghost because the difference that it makes is so marginal it just doesn't even matter, and that would also mess up your ability to have your Intellect, Discipline, or Discipline Strength in a lot of cases. So it's just, why would you do that? Those perks are basically useless, and they should be treated as something very insignificant. Considering the Ghost is supposed to be knowledgeable, I think it would be pretty appropriate to have him gain the choice of a Crucible, location, and material specialization over time and have them all available at once rather than bound by the shell he wears. So, for instance, if you found that team of Hunters in the Crucible, you could switch off of Titan Bounty onto Hunter Bounty on the same Ghost rather than having to switch Ghosts. You could do the same thing going from Mars to Venus. You could switch off Relic Iron Locator to Spirit Bloom Locator if you had those abilities unlocked. I think that would be better to, fit the theme of the Ghost being knowledgeable. I think that would help him feel like more of a mark of game completion, and considering he was there in the very beginning of the game, I think that would be appropriate. And I think that considering the perks are so weak right now, it just doesn't make sense to not let us have pretty much all of them available if we want. Their convenience is more than anything, and I think it would be kind of cool to actually, favor one of our Ghost shells. A really good job considering, or just the Ghost himself and then have the shell be a shader. But at any rate, I just like the image of walking on Mars and seeing my Ghost display nodes, give me Glimmer, highlight majors, all at the same time. I actually think that class items should not affect light value either. I don't know why that became a thing. It doesn't really make any sense that something like a gigantic cloak that's legendary has the same defense value as a cloak that does absolutely nothing to guard your back in defense value. Like, when you're wearing a chest piece, it always covers your chest, but when you're wearing a class item, it doesn't necessarily cover the same stuff, and having it related to defense value feels kind of shoehorned and random. At any rate, I definitely think that cloaks should also provide bonuses if they complete an armor set, to reflect the fact that they are such a cosmetic piece. For instance, if you want to wear a full set of mismatched gear in a blue class item that looks cool, go nuts, but if you wear the full set of raid gear or Nightfall gear as well as the raid cloak or Nightfall cloak, then you get a cool cosmetic effect. They're doing something like that where they have the full Taken shader allowing you to do the Twitch in the April update. That's pretty cool, but I think that they should also apply that sort of logic to having a full set of raid gear with raid cloak, and I think that Nightfall gear, again, I think that should exist, and I think that should have an effect. For instance, let's say that you spawn in the tower with full raid gear from King's Fall, and you come in through the Hive portal, that you use to enter the raid after doing that very first Tomb Husk part. Or let's say that you play with a full set of Nightfall gear, and every time you die in the Crucible, you explode into engrams. And obviously they would be cosmetic, but I think that it would be pretty cool to have those kinds of effects, and I really don't know if that's beyond Bungie's resources. It would be a really cool way of showing that you had invested some time in the game. And I'm sure that I could come up with other examples if I were pressed to, But I feel like even just those two demonstrates that the idea could be really interesting, and I don't think that it is outside of Bungie's resources. I could be wrong, I could be overestimating what they have capable to, allocate to that particular thing, but I think the idea is good. Anyway.
Have fun with that.
I think that class items really do make the most sense as a purely cosmetic piece. Particularly Hunter Cloaks really demonstrate this, but Titan Marks also, because they seem to have so little bearing on your, armor, which is to say, like, if someone were to shoot you, I don't think a little piece of cloth would protect you, and if it would protect you, then why is a tiny piece of cloth just as good as a big one? It doesn't really make sense. They should be cosmetic. Artifacts are just silly in their current form. It makes no sense that they provide light level in my opinion, but that aside, they just don't change the way you play at all. I think it would be a lot cooler with effects like buffs melee damage against minions of the darkness times 3. I mean, considering melee damage is pitiful currently, I don't see how that could hurt, and it would increase the PvE viability of arc blades and shoulder charges and sun charges. Or you could have a perk like consecutive precision shots increases damage to 115% after the first shot, which would be great for bosses. Or you could have a perk that makes enemies much more inclined to aim at you or aggro certain enemies to support your team. Or you could have a perk that grants infinite primary ammo for when the guy on your team clearing out ads needs to be able to not run out of ammo, like during Golgoroth when you're killing the Cursed Thrall. I mean, the choices here are definitely plentiful. Introducing a neat little trinket that has a huge impact on how you play the class would be a lot more interesting than a little trinket that basically performs how you would expect a little trinket to perform, by not doing anything. I mean, imagine picking up an artifact and seeing that it has the melee damage perk on it and being like, oh my god, thank goodness, I can actually use Sun Charge to good effect in PvP now. Would that not be kind of cool? I realize that those examples might be kind of overpowered. You would really need to focus on balancing those. The point is not that those are the best examples in the world. The point is that they should have an impact. They should be able to change the way that you play pretty drastically without making things that are clearly overpowered. I mean, I'm pretty sure that literally all of those examples except the primary one are obviously overpowered. Maybe not the sniper one either. I don't know. Anyway, point being, we're going to move on. The rest of armor really ought to blend cosmetics with usefulness a little bit better. I mean, exotics clearly show that Bungie has considered that idea, but why not further? Why can't there be boots that give you a bit of supercharge for every time you kill an enemy during Sunbreaker, or a helmet that halfway regenerates Voidwalker grenades every time a minion of the darkness is killed? The mechanic for perks to work in PvP and PvE separately is there. I mean, Inverse Shadow exists, for instance. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to balance that with PvP and PvE, and it would make armor much more interesting because you could get a full Voidwalker set, or a full Sunbreaker set, or a full Nightstalker set. It would be a fine line to walk with exotics, obviously, because if you had a full Sunbreaker set, it might be better than wearing a Sunbreaker exotic. But I think that exotics like Purifier Robes, Twilight Garrison, Bones of Io, Imperium Bellicose, Helm of St. 14, and the Ram are the only ones that really deserve to be exotics in the first place. If the perk is possible without an exotic, it's silly to grant it as part of an exotic piece of gear, because what could be less out of the ordinary than a perk that has no special requirement? How exotic is it to give you a perk that you already have?
Oh my god.
The end point of this whole discussion is that armor needs to be really unique and valuable, or everyone will just wear intellect discipline with the highest light they can 90% of the time, and that's just lame. It's a largely untapped source of variety, and for most of what could be done to make it interesting, the precedent is already there. For my final point in this loot video, I want to talk for just a moment about factions. With the new system giving us exotic class items at rank 25, which are super cool by the way, we really should have been given a progressive way of ranking the factions up. It makes no sense to give us a reward that is totally unreasonable to pursue. The best rep rewards come from Nightfalls, and after that, bounties, with a rep level of 25 being 250 Nightfalls, 250 weeks worth of time. You're looking at 4.6 years of Nightfalls for a Dead Orbit faction cloak. Of course, you get pity rep from Crucible, Strikes, Patrols, and Bounties, anywhere from 10 to about 50, but let's not pretend that somehow makes getting 60,000 reps somehow a reasonable goal. In a game like RuneScape, dedicating the hundreds of hours to getting a high-level skill made sense, but in a game like Destiny, where the amount of rep gained was arbitrarily cut in half in year 2, it's no surprise that aiming for rank 25 isn't worth it at all. 99 strength in RuneScape, that's a game changer. Wearing the exotic Dead Orbit cloak, you look a little bit different. It's not really worth it. The point is, we need a way of earning substantial reputation, and we need a reason to want to. Factions are basically pointless right now. If you got a shader from rank 10, another from 25, another from 50, and a grand package at 100 for a ship, shader, and class item, that would be cool. Of course, that would mean we wouldn't need things like we would need things like missions for rep, complete 3 Crucible games for 1,000 rep, complete 5 patrols for 500, complete a strike for 250, etc. And suddenly people would see those substantial increases in reputation and it would feel worth pursuing. Why bother doing all the Vanguard bounties if you won't rank up for another 8 days anyway? You'd need to do them every day, all of them for 8 days to get to rank up. Doing the Nightfall and every Vanguard bounty every day, it would take more than 6 months, I think, to hit rank 25. If my math is right, I could say that is probably far off, but I did this math a while ago. I haven't checked it since. I know that you're not hitting rank 25 in anything short of a month if you're not donating all of your materials to them. I mean, rep needs to be substantial and worth working towards an end goal. I'm not saying that my suggested system here is perfect, but factions should be progressive and they should have a reasonable end goal worth pursuing in the long term, and there should be milestones along the way, and you should be able to show off that you've been loyal to Dead Orbit since day one with something other than having played in year one. I mean, currently they're just something that you passively have going on in the background, and it just disappoints you every 3 weeks or so, provided you don't give a rock shit all every mode of light you find in the corpses of various Hive and the Dreadnought. I mean, honestly, do we want to earn the bulk of our reputation from donating? That's not cool. That's all there really is to it. I do think that things like titles might be worth considering as well. Something to show, again, that you've been loyal to a certain faction for a really long time. I know that the rep bonus is going to be increased in the April update, but I still think that the faction system itself is not really very well worked out. The exotic cloaks are a good start, but I think the entire system should be modeled in that way. By the way, just to be clear, suggesting that we have to hit rank 100 while getting 100 rep per patrol or so, that would be like 41.3% as much effort as hitting rank 25 through patrols is now. So literally less than half the amount of effort. Rank 25 is a low rank, and we get pitiful rep. That's just not exciting. A high level rank to hit, like 100 with high rep, is just more exciting. And I certainly don't know why they thought it was a good idea to change it so drastically from year 1 to year 2, because that just gives us the sense that the economy could just completely tank randomly, which is silly.
Yeah, I got him.
I'm pretty sure that's really all I wanted to talk about, and thank you for actually taking the time to hear me out on this. I've been meaning to make this video for a very, very long time, and I only just now got around to it due to a lot of stuff going on in real life and not really having the time to dedicate to actually working on this. If it sounds like I am not on Bungie's side during this, please listen to it again, because I have absolutely no problem with what Bungie's done. They've got such a good game going on right now. I absolutely love playing it. I feel like the gameplay, no matter how bad the loot system is, I will still play the game, because Titan skating is awesome, and using Raise Lighter is awesome, and shade stepping in the Crucible is awesome. There's like, Destiny's fantastic. I think Destiny 2, I have extremely high hopes. I'm not really sure what we're looking at for the rest of year 2 right now, but I do think that Destiny 2 is going to absolutely kick ass, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, yeah. If this comes off as negative or just like I'm whining, it really isn't. I'm just saying what I think really ought to be looked at a little more closely in the next installments of Destiny. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I will see you next time.
World's first. That's actually even.